Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis-Abrams. This is the place where we connect the dots of TV and feminism to American culture and politics. If you like what you hear, head to tvherstory.com and listen into all of our archives that are categorized to make it easier to find what you're looking for. And also while you're there, please sign up for our newsletter. Promise I'll never sell your information. Now on with the show. Hey, TV Herstoryans. I've been thinking a lot lately about risk and fear and what it means to spend your privilege and to use your voice, and for some to find their voice. And then there's that other side, that other little voice in you that says, don't rock the boat. So when I think about risk, I think about people who say that they've worked very hard to get where they are and they don't want to risk failure. They don't want to risk a reputation. And so they live in fear because ultimately their game comes down to what's in it for me. Now, I would say, of course you should speak up. Of course you should. So here we are in the fall of 2024. And wow, we have lived through some incredible years of change. And there's a part of me that finds more than ever a sense of hope around open-mindedness and understanding, and the sense that we have access to knowledge of all sorts of information about science and health and body and wellness and the brain and relationships. And so I feel like this should, in fact, seed our tolerance and our resilience. This is what that looks like. And it feels pretty good. I think about science a lot. And the fact that we know more about our bodies today than we did when I was growing up, that we have a better understanding of diseases, that there are medicines out there that can help people live with diseases if, in fact, they aren't curing it. And then, of course, there's vaccinations. Don't get me going. And then there are others who simply fear change. It's being forced upon them, even though they benefit from all of the advancements that I just listed. But rather they subscribe to some strict set of rules that they can go to, that they can see the words, and that those words must be truthful because they're printed. It's a very simplistic way of thinking. It's a way for them to control their lives, for them to not live in fear. This is nothing new in America. We know that. And that's a lot of what I do here at Advanced TV Herstory, is to kind of take a look back at where we were with fear and understanding. So we're about to examine two key moments in TV. One is a delightful, delicious, polite pushback. And the other is, well, it was this groundbreaking moment of allyship on prime time, back before the bicentennial. TV Herstoryans, you know that week in and week out, month in and month out, I love to connect the dots of TV and women to American culture and politics. So today's lesson takes us back to the time frame of 1970 to 1974. And I'm going to give you some context, too, about what those early days of television delivered or didn't deliver. And it revolves around the concept that's even controversial today about Americans' views on homosexuality. You know, 50 years ago, as late as 50 years ago, as late as 40 years ago, it was considered both a disease and immoral, gays and lesbians, and that fear. And that was homophobia. And of course, we saw it play out on TV, as we have with so many other isms and phobias. And that's sort of where change starts to happen. This episode first started out as one that was going to focus on a TV talk show moment, and it's an incredible one. So my TV talk show experience is from the 1970s for the most part, when I was old enough to come home from school sick and get to lay around, or that I spent summers in the basement watching TV. And there was this woman named Virginia Graham, who for the most part had already reached her peak, but wow, she had been a talk show phenom in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. She was largely in syndication. Her shows were called Food for Thought. They aired in 1953 to 1957. Then in the 60s, from 63 to 69, it was called Girl Talk. And then lastly, for 2 years, 1970 to 1972, it was the Virginia Graham Show. Now, Virginia Graham on paper looks like quite a feminist, right? She was this hardworking first-generation American. She grew up in Chicago as the daughter of a German department store owner, an immigrant. While in Chicago, she received her undergrad in anthropology from the University of Chicago. She had already attended a prestigious private school in Chicago. And so she graduated from the University of Chicago in 1931 and then later gets a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern. Think about it. Oh my gosh, this is 100 years ago. 100 years ago, she was in college. There just weren't that many women pursuing college degrees. And if they were basically to become teachers. It's just fascinating. And that wasn't just at state schools. She was being educated in some of the Midwest's most elite institutions. So you would think, for the most part, that Graham must be a smart cookie, right? Virginia Graham? But at the age of 58, a time when, yes, some of us think that our experience gives us this certain advantage and understanding of the world. Well, hell, she had been an influencer for 20 years. Well, she opened her yap and all of her privilege spilled out, and it was not pretty. And June Lockhart was having none of it. So before I get to the clip, you're saying, okay, Cynthia, June Lockhart, who? Okay, June is still alive. She's celebrating her 99th birthday this year. And you will find her face familiar, more familiar if you're a baby boomer or a film buff or a retro TV fan. So the next time you watch the holiday classic, Meet Me in St. Louis, keep an eye out for June Lockhart. She's in the dance scene. Actually, she appears a couple of times, but most specifically in the dance scene toward the end. It's that one scene where Judy Garland has her hair up and she's wearing this just incredibly dark red velvet dress. And June Lockhart is playing Lucille Ballard, and she is wearing kind of a champagne colored dress, and she's got a black velvet choker. I just have to digress a little bit because I love Meet Me in St. Louis, and that's one of my favorite scenes. Also, it's just important for you to know that June Lockhart had been around in the business for nearly 25 years before she landed on Virginia Graham's talk show couch. She had been the mom in TV's Lassie. She had been the mom veterinarian in TV's Lassie. She was the mom space explorer in Lost in Space, both the original and the remake. She appeared in multiple episodes of Petticoat Junction, Beverly Hills 90210, General Hospital, and Quincy M.E. And it was actually in 1970, and Lockhart was wrapping up her stint as Dr. Janet Craig, who had been the Shady Rest's proprietor on Petticoat Junction. So she filled in when B. Benaderet died while Petticoat Junction was still going on. Important to know also that while Virginia Graham was very well educated, June Lockhart was the daughter of actors and graduated from Westlake School for Girls in Beverly Hills. So that was it, a high school degree. So on the talk show, more context here before I get to the clip, Lockhart appears alongside the Reverend Troy Perry, who just 2 years earlier had founded in LA the Metropolitan Community Church. The Metropolitan Community Church ministers to the LGBTQ communities of then the late 60s. This was a time of tremendous change in America. So this clip was originally captured by Randy Wicker, who in 1970 had a reel-to-reel video recorder that I can't even fathom. Oh my gosh, what a treasure. It was transferred to digital and uploaded to YouTube by the renowned author and scholar Steven Capsuto. The link to the YouTube clip is in the show notes.
I feel like it's wrong then not to have children, anyone not to have children. Is this true?
What? No. Yes, I think it's too bad for them. I don't think it's... But that is not a sin against the law of nature.
Well, it's not against the sin of law of nature to be a homosexual. Animals have homosexual acts with each other. Go to the San Diego Zoo, watch the monkeys.
But you know what God gave us that he didn't give animals? He gave us the intellect and the self-discipline and the sense of value.
That's correct, to be happy human beings. And if there are those individuals who happen to be heterosexual, I agree with the doctor, there are those individuals who are very happy in a homosexual relationship. And they would be very unhappy in a heterosexual relationship.
Basically, what I was saying was that we don't thoroughly understand it yet, and that we should not categorize it or condone it or deny it. We have to understand it.
Yeah, but June, you wanted to say something.
I was just going to say, Virginia, I'm just a guest here, but if
No,
you'll
you
forgive me, I don't
discussion.
think you should moralize about it if you've never been a homosexual. Because you have to...
Are you kidding? You don't think I should moralize about taking dope or moralize about shooting and killing
No,
if
we're
I've
not
never
talking
killed
about
anybody?
dope and killing. We're
I think
talking
we
about
are. I
homosexuality.
think we're killing in civilization.
It has
Then
nothing
they
to
have
do with the
certain
other two
norms.
things. Don't get off your subject.
We must say this, though. You have to remember homosexuality throughout history has never risen above from 4 to 10% probably. We have information. We have statistics that will bear this out.
Well, won't a church like yours make it rise more?
No. We're only helping those who are already homosexual. We're not trying to convert people to homosexuality. That's not our reason at all. Our reason is to give a place of worship where homosexuals who feel like they have been denied the right of the church can come and seek God without any
But
problem.
now wait, do you think it's a condition that should be cured?
No, I don't.
That's the why.
With I believe there are some cases, certainly.
I believe that there are cases, Doctor, where there are individuals who are certainly neurotic and who have been conditioned to be neurotic by the society, who cannot come to terms with the homosexual and who doesn't understand his problems. And in society, we have him as being sick, criminal, or the other thing of being sinful.
Now, may I explain something? Because you make me sound hard and calloused, and I'm not. I have many homosexual friends, and I have found them to be talented and brilliant and charming. But we've never discussed it any more than they've asked my personal habits.
Ask them.
Yes.
Your friends that are homosexuals, what do you feel about them?
I adore them and never discuss it. I've had one friend for 7 years whom I was told, is that way. And any more than I would ask, I love the language. No, but any more than I would expect anybody to ask me what Harry and I do in our private
Why,
life.
Virginia, I've heard you talk about what you and Harry do.
No, what don't do.
So, June Lockhart stood up to a bully. How great is that? She used her indoor voice. She didn't call anyone names, and she stuck to her points. I don't think she was expecting the conversation was going to go in that direction, but maybe she was sitting on the couch next to the good Reverend, knowing she might need to come to his aid. And some would also say, looking at it from the outside, that she put her career at risk. And yet June Lockhart, at that point, a Hollywood veteran of 25 years, had to have seen a lot of homophobia in her time. She had to have experienced malice and thoughtlessness and derogatory language used against men and women that she worked with in the business. I am grateful to Wicker and Capsuto for all their work in bringing this to people via YouTube, but they've also done a lot of work through the years documenting these key moments in TV history and history. Preparing this episode, I finally picked up his important work, Alternate Channels, a book Capsuto first published in 2000 and updated in 2020. Alternate Channels is the definitive history and milestone description of gays and lesbians and queers and trans depictions on television. I highly recommend it. I have put a link in it to the show notes, and I encourage you to buy it new, keep it in your library. You're not going to find a better reference book, as well as sort of a blended depiction of both the social and the TV. Capsuto's chronology starts out in the earliest days of television, when the visual medium still took a lot of its cues from radio. And he lists the incredibly denigrating but subtle references to gay men in radio and early TV comedies. There would be the lisp, which you could do on radio, and that was a signal. Effeminate mannerisms, and even to the degree that there was like a whoosh, whoosh, whoosh sound for when men who were subtly projected to be gay, that was part of the sound that went with them. And then also the sign by a straight person of a limp wrist, and that perpetuated well into the 70s and 80s. So Capsuto crosswalks against key moments in history, like the 1948 publication of the Kinsey Report, or an early 1960 documentary on NET, which was the predecessor to PBS, about homosexuality. And then there's Stonewall, and there's the AIDS and HIV sad chapter in American history of how we could not deal with that sort of public health crisis. But all of that, just to name a few, a lot of context. And in the end, every single chapter really indicates just how little TV networks wanted anything to do with sex of any sort, let alone homosexuality. And his research also reveals that gay male characters were far more acceptable to producers and networks and sponsors than lesbians were. If they didn't want anything to do with homosexuals, well, gays were still better than lesbians. Gays were generally white men in their 20s or 30s, and they were always pretty nice looking, and they were nice dressers. So there's a lot of stereotyping going on, and very rarely were they really ever in any relationship with any gay man. That was not to be had until much, much later. So kind of like characters of color, their stories were never really the main stories. They were just there as bit parts. Capsuto then does a really nice job of explaining the quest for visibility that got them from those bit parts to larger parts, put them into the plot, while also, at the same time, running defense with those, like Virginia Graham, who were bent on demonizing gays and later lesbians. Because listeners, we know that change never comes easy. The movement to improve representation on television became highly organized, and that was due to some people who felt that in order to become more accepted, the representation on TV needed to change. So, through a lot of negotiation, the networks and the producers attempted, when it was convenient, to have gays review scripts and story arcs for accuracy and acceptable language, and that was progress. But the book tells so much more. It is well researched. It is footnoted. It has an incredible index. It will give you all the information you need. And I so respect Steven Capsuto for starting this project a full decade before he even published it in 2000, and then to take the time to update it. Because as he says, the last 20 years, 2000 to 2020, has just been so filled with change and so filled with new groundbreaking plots and depictions. Now, what he does also share, lesbians entered television through storylines that, for the most part, depicted them as unstable, aggressive, violent, and bitter. They were kind of easy villains, and that's not very respectful at all, because it was perhaps an indicator that they really didn't know how to bring them into storylines, and they didn't want them to be recurring characters. So in 1972, Donna Mills, who for the most part had a very robust television career, played a lesbian in the TV series The Bold Ones. And in 1973, Lois Nettleton appeared in a few episodes of Medical Center as a lesbian psychiatrist. She was not a killer. She was not a man-hater. She actually was responsible for conveying a certain amount of science and trying to sort of educate around lesbianism. But it was in 1974, in the first season of Policewoman, that, well, there was a lesbian plot that actually was the plot, and it was a typical policewoman plot, and there were a lot of stereotypes, but there was also some nuanced introduction of a different way of thinking. So important to know that in 1974, primetime television was governed by the Family Hour, which was an effort to stem criticism that series had waded too far into sex and drugs and violence. Of course, this was mostly sex and drugs and violence aimed toward white male audiences, and women just sort of sat on the couch and watched as well. But they didn't want kids to be on the couch watching as well. So they introduced the Family Hour. And it was a certain amount of time that TV series could not be showing that kind of content, and also a big flag to the producers of the more adult primetime that they needed to sort of curb their ambitions. Now, the reason why we don't talk about the Family Hour is in 1976, it was ruled in a court that it was violating the First Amendment, and TV needed to do a better job of regulating adult-themed content. So in 1974, Policewoman, starring Angie Dickinson, phenom, still alive, presented in its 8th episode. Okay, groundbreaking TV series, 8th episode. This one called Flowers of Evil, and you can find it on YouTube. And they really took advantage of a lesbian plot to also distinguish Policewoman from other male-led cop shows. But here's the plot. There are three lesbians. Mame, these names are incredible. Mame presents much more butch than the other two. And then there are Gladys and Janet, whose hair and makeup and apparel really sort of presents them as straight. And all three of them run a home for aged women. Some of them are bedridden and others can get around some. Lo and behold, one of their residents is found murdered. So Sergeant Pepper Anderson goes undercover as a nurse, and the police suspect that there's foul play because it's also discovered that the dead lady's bank account has been drained. Pepper gets the evidence she needs, and the three who demonstrate very little affection for each other. I mean, you get most of the way through the episode and you're having a hard time seeing that this was a very, very nuanced way of depicting these women as lesbians, not just as three women who work together. It was really subtle. So they are charged with murder and theft, and the police try to get any of them to confess, to turn on the other. They really want to find out which of the three actually did the murder. And Pepper works the one who she thinks is the least strident, the least defensive of the three, Janet. So once Pepper, in her wiles, gets Janet to affirm that it was in fact Gladys who killed the lady, Pepper connects with her in a way that only could be done on this groundbreaking series. And I am left to wondering whether or not the men wrote this line. There were three male writers. Did three male writers write this scene, or did Angie Dickinson change it? Or was there some woman writer on the bench who was called in to help write this scene?
She must be very special to you. How long has it been? 10, 12 years? You have nothing to hide from me. I knew it the minute I saw you two together. And I don't condemn you. Not at all. I've known what a love like yours can do to a person. I've lived with it. I don't think I've ever told anybody else this. In college, I had a roommate who meant a great deal to me. But I meant even more to her. I watched what a love like yours can do to a person. I watched her suffering. And I couldn't help her. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is don't protect Gladys, don't destroy yourself, okay? Yeah, it was Gladys who registered at the motel. It was Gladys who killed Kathleen. Don't hurt her. Don't hurt her, please. She's all I've ever had.
Now I know what you're thinking. Is this series, which preceded Charlie's Angels by 2 years, problematic in 100 ways? Yes, it is. But change has to start somewhere. This was only 4 years after Virginia Graham had her own talk show and was espousing a lot of very backwards, fear-inducing disinformation. Remember, Law and Order SVU stands on the shoulder of Cagney and Lacey, which aired in the 80s. And Cagney and Lacey was a product of many people's dissatisfaction with Charlie's Angels, which aired in the 70s. Now, it's also important to note that a later Policewoman episode actually loops into that college roommate that Pepper mentions in the story. And so what we come to realize is that Sergeant Pepper Anderson may have been the first ally on TV. Now, I and many others have criticized policewomen because invariably, more often than not, a man saves Pepper from danger. And on occasion, Pepper Anderson is running through alleys wearing glittery evening gowns, carrying her purse and her gun. And it just seems wildly unrealistic. But these were the inventions of men, largely controlled by men. And I should do more to investigate just what Angie Dickinson was thinking and what she wants us to know about her time making policewoman. But anyway, little nuggets like this, a line or two that she said to Janet in the interview room, well, that takes a little bit of the edge off of the otherwise glaringly harsh representation of lesbians. So this episode was not perfect by any means, but it did give you a glimmer of what was coming. And what was coming? Well, 23 years later, Ellen came out on TV, and it was a huge deal. 23 years from Angie Dickinson sliding in one line to Ellen, the puppy episode. Steven Capsuto's Alternate Channels book covers all of that too. Honestly, I learned a lot from Mr. Capsuto. And so it's occurred to me some days that while I connect seemingly tiny dots of TV and feminism to American culture and politics, they are dots that need connecting. Because first, I happened to see this TV clip from the Virginia Graham show where mild-mannered June Lockhart just does a clapback. Virginia Graham, so well-read, so well-bred. And June Lockhart coming up with chutzpah that just makes you cheer for her. And Angie Dickinson's first step into allyship. This is why I podcast. Many thanks to Mary Lou Morose, the audio editor of this and every episode for the last 2 years now. Great work, Mary Lou. Nivea Lopez works then on the video aspect of this presentation. Thank you to all the YouTube followers and subscribers. If you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe. Lastly, the jingle music has always been Jazzer's Take Me Higher, found at Free Music Archive. Go to tvherstory.com to find out where on social media you can follow, learn a little bit more about all of the team, all of the archives, listen to any episode you want, and most importantly, sign up for the newsletter. Your information will not be sold. It comes out monthly. There's no advertisement. It's just my way to connect with you. Most importantly, thank you for listening and sharing this episode. Stay in touch with all of your comments. Thanks for listening to Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.